The identity politics of the Northeast has resulted in the creation of several smaller states carved out of Assam. Now there are demands for further autonomy, a greater share of the natural resources, demands for Bodoland, Gorkha land, Karbi Anglong, the Garo Hills, Greater Nagaland. All these are the results of some form of subnationalism, and they're also linked, some of them still, to violent movements. In this episode of Northeast Interface, we look at the issues related to smaller states in the Northeast. As we go through a general election, we marvel at the sheer size of the great Indian nation, its landscape, its people, its ethnic and linguistic diversity. Political commentators and analysts try to understand the mood of the 815 million electorate across the country by breaking up their diversity into identities. Presuming voting would take place on lines of common identity and representation, which they evaluate as social development. The northeast of India is a collection of small states which emerged out of identity, and identity politics continues to be the basis of much that is described as complex in the region.
I'm not in favor of, even the word or term Northeast, because we don't have a Northwest or a Southeast or a Southwest. So, why a Northeast? And it obviously makes others look at it as one block, as one state, and which is not, because even if you look at the history or the culture of different states out there, which is completely different. Manipur has nothing whatsoever in common with Meghalaya, for example, or Meghalaya has nothing to do with Tripura. Within Northeast, there are problems. In fact, as recently as the last 1 week, there have been problems between Assam and Mizoram border. There have been problems between Assam and Arunachal border. There have been problems between Assam and Meghalaya border. So interstate borders out there have problems. And also within the state, there are various subnational assertions. Within Assam, you have various statehood demands. For example, the Bodos in lower Assam now want a 50% of division of Assam.
Political stability has led to some economic progress, and don't forget that also the size of population is so small that these states therefore are that much viable. And also, but there are big issues there as well which do not get highlighted in the national media because it's difficult to reach there. There is, no national media except for Doordarshan has an office in Gangtok. So that's now when you talk about Gorkhaland, for example, what Mamata Banerjee now says, because her party is in power, it says that 3 subdivisions of Kurseong, Kalimpong and Darjeeling it's not a sustainable state itself. Though the GGM and the Gorkha parties want a separate state, they have done a lot of agitations, but there is an argument for that as well. But I think the question that these demands emanate from is more of identity politics, and therefore some partly true, some perceived notions of discrimination and economic development.
One of the problems of small states is that they could be fiefdoms of the ruling elite or become kleptocracies. Issues of lack of development are linked to growing corruption. The small states depend almost entirely on the centre for funds, and high voter turnout could well be the electorate demanding greater accountability.
When I think the makers of Constitution had envisaged a situation where people are going to assert for greater autonomy, statehood, and that's why in the Northeast they had a provision of 6th schedule, and in what we call the Maoist area there's a 5th schedule. And under the 6th schedule, in fact, the country's first autonomous district was the North Kokrjahar Hills Autonomous District. If you go out there, you would see that there's nothing that the autonomy has actually been able to deliver. So even if we go for greater autonomy or grant more autonomy to various areas out there, or grant statehood, the underlying problem out there is that there has been a complete absence of governance. So unless there is a accountability of governance, it doesn't really matter how many states you create or how many autonomous districts are created out there.
Each state government, how small it might be, has certain rights and privileges under the constitution, which are never diluted, not just because the size is small. And government of India is also trying its best. These are called special category states, where any government of India funding is 90% and 10% has to be borne by the state, which is simply just almost like a subsidy, 100% subsidy. Unfortunately, because of the lack of industrialization and commerce, tax revenues are very, very less. Except for Assam and Sikkim, the rest of the other states contribute less than 15% of the total revenue which they receive from the government of India.
One thing that I realized while be it traveling to Kohima, be it traveling to Sikkim or Assam, for some reason, because the industry investment there is less, the industry hasn't invested that much in these places for various reasons, for reasons of connectivity being poor, for reasons of insurgency being there. So the fight is for greater central resources, the money that comes from the center, and that figures prominently in the election discourse there.
Insurgency has thrived in identity politics. Xenophobia, contested history, tribal anxieties have been issues that have led to the creation of small states in the Northeast. The question of ethnicity and identity was foremost in the minds of policymakers while carving out the small states of the Northeast.
You see, history in India's Northeast is very contested. So everyone has their own version of history. So identity politics also comes from a contested history. And as long as, and that is why it's very important to also, pay attention to the Northeast for a various, apart from the other infrastructural, etc., reasons, to be actually, this history of Northeast needs to be evaluated, needs to be written, needs to be taught. The Indian textbooks don't have history of the Northeast.
Insurgency remains, but it's degenerated into more of extortion rackets. Now, the demand for smaller states, because there are so many tribes there, when you talked about Greater Nagaland, it is that they believe that all Nagas should have a place called Nagaland, and that is where the Nagas live in Manipur as well. So these are, Karbi Anglong, for example, or even in the Garo in Meghalaya. So, these are tribal rivalries, the rivalries for access to greater resources. And, when I traveled out of, I traveled in the Northeast keeps crying that the center has discriminated against them when it comes to the Northeast, because Assam gets the lion's share, which is true. Out of the 10 airports available in Northeast, 7 are in Assam.
In Nagaland, there is a ceasefire, so there is some kind of a stability. But in Manipur, it's very, very active, and there are multiple number of groups. Meghalaya also has a problem, but it is under control. Assam, the Bodoland Territorial Council has been created, and now the Dima Hasao and Karbi autonomous councils have been created. So peace is coming, but Manipur and Nagaland we need to resolve as quickly as possible.
Oh, absolutely, it's dangerous. In fact, as we are speaking, 11 Bengali Muslims were killed in Lower Assam in the last 24 hours, which is again a result of Bodo sub-nationalism. So while identity politics is something that cannot be ignored, because that's how they are going to assert themselves, but at the same time, to be able to actually encourage it and to legitimize it, and not, because the government has not, if you take Bodoland as a case in point, we've had riots in 1996, we've had riots in 1998, we've had riots in 2012, and it's an ongoing process. And not just riots, not just ethnic riots. So there have been riots between the Bodos and the Adivasis, the Bodos and the Bengali Muslims, the Bodos and the non-Bodos, and then you've had two very violent insurgent groups out there, the Bodo Liberation Tigers, BLT, and the NDF, the National Democratic Front of Bodoland. Both the groups have surrendered, they have come for talks, but they continue their extortion, they continue, and they've also formed political formations. But they continue enforcing that one point agenda of a 50-50 division of Assam, or basically, and how will they achieve the 50-50 division of Assam? By turning out all non-Boros from that area.
The fear that identities would be swamped by outsiders is still a concern today. And while people of the Northeast may feel discrimination in other parts of India, a cocktail of xenophobia and reverse stereotypes exists against outsiders in the Northeast as well.
One also needs to understand that there is a reverse stereotype. And from 1960s, mid-60s, early 70s to even till today, the number of lakhs of people have been displaced, thousands have been killed, maimed, kidnapped, and hundreds have gone missing in the Northeast, based on all the xenophobic movements out there. See, initially it was the Bengalis, and then it became non-tribals versus tribals. So, and then it became even the Assamese Assamese caste Hindu was in Meghalaya was seen as a non-tribal and was targeted. So so similarly in every state, the dynamics are a little different, but more or less it's a tribal versus non-tribal.
About militants, but before 10 years back when I was a kid, that time I think that people are very afraid. They're running here and there. Those are young guys. They didn't stay at the home because army has come. They are tortured. Girl was not. They're scaring to be at home alone. They shifted to the hostel for their studies. So nowadays it's become settled down. I feel so.
You're watching Northeast Interface, where we are discussing identity politics and small states in the region. We're taking a break. Stay with us.